Yeah.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us, the Project Censored radio show. I'm your co-host, Eleanor Goldfield, along with Mickey Huff, and we're very glad to welcome to the program Nicholas H. Wolfinger, who's a professor of family and consumer studies and adjunct professor of sociology at the University of Utah, where he's taught since 1998. He's published 6 books, as well as short pieces in The Atlantic, National Review, Huffington Post, and other outlets. Nick, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. But I don't see Mickey.
Nope, Mickey's not here. He's the ghost in the machine.
Okay.
Um, no,
That's
Mickey and I typically do one interview each, and then it airs on the radio programs as a full hour show. But Mickey is out there, and he'll be listening. So to make it creepy for everyone involved. So Nick, you're the editor of the new release called Professors Speak Out: The Truth About Campus Investigations, which includes some of the more recent and in the media attacks against professors for being vocal about the ongoing genocide in Gaza, but more so deals with issues such as gender and race in terms of professors dealing with internal proceedings related to actions or speech surrounding those issues. So there's a lot in this book, and there's a lot to get into. I have like a page of notes, but we only have so much time, so I'm gonna have to cherry pick here. Um, so I think like one of the themes or theses of the book that seems clear to me is that people conflate disagreement with an attack, and discomfort with harassment. But something that I thought was interesting in actually reading a few of the pieces in the book, on a few occasions I found myself thinking, well, the person writing this doesn't seem comfortable with their actions or their views being questioned. And so something that I talk about a lot not in organizing spaces is that it's important to feel uncomfortable, because it means that we're being confronted with ideas that aren't something we already hold dear, or we're being asked to question those things that we take as gospel or feel are true. But I'm curious, how do you feel about it being more than just the students that should be invited into this discomfort and prompted to reflect on practices and prejudices, as in like, how should there be some kind of like give and take in terms of a student feeling, rightfully or wrongfully, triggered or just uncomfortable in a teaching space, and how should that teacher or professor or whatever respond so that the person, not the only person being asked to feel uncomfortable is the student in that situation?
First of all, I think you're 100% right, and that is an astute observation, because there's nothing so affirming of dogma as there is repeating it to students for 30 years, day in and day out. Uh, Mostly at my university, I teach statistics, and I was always told that you'll never understand statistics until you've taught it. There's some truth to that. I also teach jujitsu, and this good for my jujitsu game. So I welcome discomfort. Sometimes, the cases presented in the book, and just to elaborate, this is 20 stories of faculty members who were investigated by their universities. And sometimes there was just an investigation. Some of the other authors of my book were fired, were lost tenure positions. Some really had their lives upended. And so I am all for discomfort. My plea for the book is that discomfort does not result in administrative action against the faculty member, because then it's coercive. It's what to do about a dogmatic faculty member who isn't breaking the rules, but has made, there's little that can be done, but, aside from really making a plea for open inquiry, and open inquiry in the classroom. One of the professional associations I belong to is something called the Heterodox Academy. And the point of the Heterodox Academy is to embrace a diversity of viewpoints in the academy. I know some progressives were scared that this was just a Trojan horse for introducing conservative views into the classroom. This was an arm of the Koch brothers, purchasing influence. It's not that, right? If academia is 99% progressives, which is about the right number, the heterodox academy is about 98%. So this is a good goal. I aspire to it. One thing I would welcome is stronger statements up and down the board about welcoming open inquiry. So many universities have such statements. I put one in my syllabus, right? I very explicitly say, this is a place where we may disagree and that I embrace differences. It doesn't come up a whole lot teaching statistics. But I provide statistics of real life phenomenon, so it sometimes does come up. And so I think having that commitment up, and people reaffirm that commitment up and down the ladder from at the university level to the faculty level is helpful. Let me also add, now that I'm talking about statements in my syllabus, I also have a statement of basic needs, which says that if you don't have enough to eat, don't have a safe place to live, are fearing unjust deportation, it's hard to do well in college. And in that case, here are some resources, and let me know, and I'll do what I can. I'll do what I can to provide you with more resources to make things easier. So I think every faculty member should have those two statements in their syllabi.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a lot of essays in the book where I found myself nodding along and things like that. And also, I appreciated that in several of the essays, somebody would say something or write something like, I had hoped that I could talk to this person about the thing that they said was so upsetting or and because I was unaware. And so it showed like this willingness to no, I would absolutely want to have this conversation.
Right.
I don't know why it's like calling the police instead of knocking on your neighbor's door to tell them to turn the music down. So like going to that escalated place, which to me just speaks to the divisive culture that we find ourselves in. That it's kind of like if you disagree with me, you're not just wrong, you're evil. And how problematic that can be, especially in a setting where there is that power dynamic in the classroom. Because I think that's another point. Because I remember being like a freshman and I'm in this, huge auditorium and listening to this professor who I did not agree with on a few points. And I wanted to find him and talk to him, and I never was able to. And it wasn't anything that would have required me to lodge a complaint. It was just a point that he made that I disagreed with. But there's also that power dynamic. Like how does academia wall off those pathways to actually reach somebody to say, hey, I felt really uncomfortable with this, or this point, it just made me feel really gross and I want to talk to you about it. Like, can you talk a little bit about those barriers that kind of make it so that people feel, well, oh, the only place I can go to is the top? And because they advertise that as the place to go in this administrative, Dante-esque, Kafkaesque inferno that we find ourselves in. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of it?
Well, first I have to take issue with something you said, and that's about the power dynamic. And that's how we traditionally think of higher education classrooms, where I, as the faculty member, am the one with the power. I don't know if that's true anymore. And for this reason, if a student takes exception with me, they can file a complaint with the university and my life will be upended. I don't have that power over students, right? I mean, the most I could do conceivably is flunk them, and at which point they might go to the university anyhow and say they were flunked for ideological reasons. So I'm not sure that faculty members have power anymore. I think more often it's the students with the power. So now, sometimes, as I note in the book, sometimes it is students who know this, right? Who know they have the power to make their professors' lives hell. Sometimes it is the administration who then seeks to attack the professor, and so they respond to any student complaint or any sign of professorial misbehavior with much more aggressive means against the computer. Let me give you an example. For the third and final time that the University of Utah investigated me, and this was during 2020, in the way that people were often investigated in 2020, and it started over a tweet. And the internet decided that I had said something threatening to a student in a tweet. I hadn't, because no one could identify what the threat was or what the repercussions were. Aside from me getting a million emails saying you're evil, I'm wording you. So the university, since I'd already been investigated twice, the university was looking for ways to possibly drive me out. And so my problem was that the student turned out to be a grad student in another department at my university, not someone at another university. That gave my university the means to act. So my dean, and I have the copies of all these emails, contacted the student that night and wanted to meet with the student. In other words, was collecting material to use against me. And so that resulted ultimately in $10,000 more for attorneys, a 3.5-hour hearing, and a formal reprimand for me. And the student, I had done nothing to. The student said as much to the dean. Right? It was just an excuse for the university to take action against a faculty member it didn't like. So my point is, these things can materialize at different levels. Sometimes it's the student who knows they can cause problem. Sometimes it's administration trying to, silence and it's a problematic faculty member. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I wanted to get us across the sense of how these kinds of actions can materialize at many different places within the university.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, I've never been a professor, so I don't know what that. I mean, my father's a professor, but and I know kvetches a lot about the administrative a word I can't say on the program, but yeah. So I've heard about it secondhand, but I myself have never been a professor. Only in feeling rather powerless in a sea of students.
Yeah.
So I get that that's a two-way street as well.
Yes.
And I'm curious because you mentioned social media, and there were a couple of instances in the book where it's brought up. And especially in one, it's the question is posed like, well, how can I be expected to be responsible in the classroom for things that I do outside of the classroom? But in reading that, I felt,
what story was this?
This was the story with that had the pictures of the Twitter battle and the racist.
Oh, yeah, you could say the name, right?
I'm not trying to protect or throw stones.
Yeah.
I didn't write down the names of people in my notes.
Yes,
I just wrote notes as I thought of them.
Oh, I got you.
But so my feeling here is that because professors and teachers and whatever, because your work is literally your mind, shouldn't you be held accountable to the things that you think and do, even though it's not inside the classroom? So for instance, if someone does something that people then see, students or other faculty or whatever see that, oh, that's really problematic, whether or not, objectively, if one could ever be objective, you would agree with that. Shouldn't you be also a professor when you're not in the classroom? And shouldn't you be held to a standard that shows that I am this person in all of the walks of life, as opposed to I can just turn on and off my misogyny or my racism or my hatred of leftists or whatever the case may be? Like, I could just turn that on and off, and we should accept that, versus shouldn't you be accountable to the person that you are outside of the classroom?
I strongly disagree with that interpretation. So to give you an example, I have a friend who's a retired police officer. Then, as now, all the time, he carried his weapon with him, his because he had felt like he had to be on guard against threats 24 hours a day. That's a tough way to live. It also presumes that I couldn't participate in any local civic organization, any club. Yeah, I don't go to church or synagogue, but any church or synagogue, any association outside the university without being judged for what I did there, right? Which just creates another way for people, for malicious people to target me and my work. So, so that's no way to live. That would be asking faculty members basically to have not appear in public aside from when they were teaching. So I would, I would define whether professors had transgressed solely on the basis of whether they were no longer able to do their jobs, not whether they had reputation, not whether they had provoked some people out in the world, because it's a big world and you'll always provoke someone.
Sure, I absolutely agree
Yeah.
with that. Although I'd say with
Yeah.
the retired police officer, it's actually statistically more dangerous to be a fisherman. So, but
But yeah,
I
no,
mean,
so I 100% agree. Police are over interpret threats in the world, right? Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think that I guess the point, and maybe I phrased it improperly,
Yeah.
but I guess what I'm trying to say here is that there's a difference between, actions that are that target people for their political opinions. So, for instance, if
Yeah.
somebody posts something that says, I hate Nazis. Okay, that's a one statement, but I hate black people is a different statement altogether because it targets people based on who they are as opposed to their ideological beliefs, right? You can stop being a Nazi. You can't stop being a black person. Or, anti-fascist. Like, I hate anti-fascist. Well, you could stop being an anti-fascist. So there's a difference between, targeting people for their political beliefs versus who they inherently are. So if a professor or what have you, a faculty member at a school shows that they are targeting people based on who they are, i.e. because they're women or indeed, men, white people, black people, what have you, isn't that more problematic than, for instance, somebody saying that I hate, Donald Trump and everybody that voted for him because they're right wing, whatever ideologues?
So, I mean, on a moral level, yes, I'm offended by anyone who offended by a racist. Um, if you are asking, uh, can that person discharge his or her ability in the classroom? Uh, I would say, it really depends, right? So I would point you to the case of a longtime Northwestern professor named Arthur Butts, who is a Holocaust denier. He also doesn't say anything in public. I don't know if it's ever been reported that that's compromising his ability to do his job, right? So I'm offended, but I don't want to. I don't. And even when people take views that offend me, are you thinking of Amy Wax at the University of Pennsylvania?
Again, I didn't write down who it was. I just kind of
No, she's not a contributor to my book, but she's in the
Oh,
news a lot. She's a racist. It's very clear. I mean, there's no ambiguity about that she's a racist. And so Penn has taken various actions against her, like removing her from teaching first-year law students, making her classes optional. I'm fine with all of that, but I don't want to see her losing her tenure position, because once we start taking away people's tenure positions, even for, beliefs that are abhorrent, it becomes easier for the Trumpists to do so. right? So I not want to maintain the principle, even when holding the principle and the person in case is, is very objectionable to me.
I guess the argument, so like, for
Yeah.
instance, I'm not familiar with the Holocaust denier, but for for somebody who has family members who died in the Holocaust,
Yeah.
I would suggest that I couldn't sit in that person's class. I wouldn't trust them to actually be fair with me, because it's clear that their views are in stark contrast with my basic, my personhood. So I guess that's the argument, is like, can a racist properly teach someone who
Yeah.
is, black or Indian or whatever, without that, even if they're teaching, statistics or something, like, can you actually be a good professor to that person if you think
Yeah.
that they are lesser than?
I'm Jewish too, and so I feel the same way about Nazis. Uh, Although my family came here earlier, so I don't have direct relatives who died in the Shoah. So I don't know, right? I think this is, these are very complicated questions that are best decided on a one-on-one basis. And, what it seems is that no one has ever, there's never been of any objection to this Holocaust denier, who's an engineering professor, that causing problems for his teaching. Luis has never made the news in recent decades, probably because he sticks to engineering in the classroom. Uh, but, there's an easy way of telling this. If no one enrolls for their class, the university would then be, I think, in a better position to say, you're not doing your job because we can't get students to take your class. And, the reason is, that's a belief that you and I hold very dear, but it may not be held so dear by all Americans who, as you well know, many of whom believe stuff that I think is struggling not to say the S word, but
Yeah,
believe some
absolutely.
crazy stuff, right? That may be be as deeply held to them as uh, my revulsion to Nazis and Holocaust deniers, and indeed to all racists is, right?
Sure, and I think
Yeah.
that, like, there was another essay in the book where someone brings up which I had a hard time reading this essay, but where he talks about being affiliated with the site Voice for Men, where a recent article touts the use of an iron mask that fits across the mouth of a woman to keep her from, quote, nagging. Um, and my feeling was, do I feel that the university dealt with this properly? No. Do I feel that you should be taken to task for being affiliated with a site like that? Absolutely.
Yeah.
What does that look like? I don't know. But I
Yeah.
also know that
Yeah. Yeah.
if I were a woman in your class, I would
Yeah.
immediately bring that up and be like, this is not okay, because you clearly think that women are inferior to men.
Yes.
And I don't feel that it's not a discomfort thing here. It's a basic human rights thing. Like,
Yes.
can you actually do your job of teaching women
Yes.
in these spaces when it's clear that you are this person that feels this way? So
Yes. So I would point out that uh, you and I have probably had accounts on social media that are also shared by awful people who like whatever Twitter has become. Even if we were back when there were fewer Nazis on it, we still both shared the site with terrible people, right? So I in the case of in the case of this person, I don't think he holds those beliefs. Uh, I don't think he holds those particular beliefs, but yeah, I would hope that people would bring that up to him in a reasonable and civil way. Let me jump in and say that you know just that you won't. Many of the authors of the contributors to this book, you will find much more sympathetic. And something I'm proud of is it's really ideologically diverse. It's more progressives than conservatives because that's how higher education is. But there are conservative scholars who are punished for their books. And there were plenty of progressive contributors, myself included, who were punished for theirs. And so this book is, I'm doing a lot of progressive media for this book. I'm also doing a bunch of conservative media for this book. And that's how I want it to be. I want people to realize that it's not, people are sure they're punished for their politics, but this is a problem across higher education that can't be just reduced to terrible things conservatives are doing or terrible things progressives are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember a few years ago when Alex Jones was canceled and a bunch of people were cheering and I was not. And I said, it's not because I like Alex Jones. If he never said another word, I'd be totally happy with that. However, I know what this means. And so I think that that's a really important point. I think like when I was reading this, and I appreciate that it made me uncomfortable, right? I appreciate that there were moments where I was like, but I also, it made me like, I guess like kind of my thesis question was, where do we draw that line between like, this is your right to say this and I want you to say it. You can stand on a rooftop and scream this. And also there's a difference between allowing people to say it and allowing people to be placed
to promulgate it.
Right. So, you know, like there's that difference. And I don't know where to draw the line. And I almost feel like maybe what you're suggesting is that there isn't really a line, like it's a case by case basis. And we should look at this as, you know, in these specific instances and not have it be this administrative, like top down, like we're afraid of losing funding and we're afraid of being seen this way or that way by the media. It should really be like an internal and not as cloak and dagger. Like there were several instances in the book where it's like, I didn't even know what was going on until I got a phone call saying that I was under investigation, but I couldn't know anything about the investigation. I'm like, what is this? This is so like, you know, James Bondian. And so it seems like that the issue isn't that we have these questions and we have these issues and like, I don't want this person to be my professor and, you know, whatever, but that it is taken up by institutions whose interests don't actually lie in academic freedom, but lie in putting on a good face for media and for donors.
Yes, 100%. I thank you for saying that. That was beautifully said. I appreciate that. Although I would say that James Bond-esque is, I think the better metaphor is Darkness at Noon, the Arthur Koestler book, which is one of my favorite books. Yeah, it's a really almost frightening book about the interrogation and show trial of a Russian government minister during the Stalin's purges. Okay, that's a bit hyperbolic. So yes, I 100% want to see these things resolved, you know, where they should be. And also I think it's very much a case by case basis in which someone has caused problems to the point where they cannot do their job, right? Let me point out, at least in the first case you mentioned, the case of Lee Jessam, who she said that ultimately, as a result of this, in the chapter, he said, what am I doing? Why am I engaged in this Twitter arguments, right? I'm going to leave this aside and, you know, keep doing my work. And he's a very accomplished scholar whose research I indeed cite on academic freedom, I cite in the book. So yeah, I think there are many more, you know, there are often many constructive places for these disagreements to happen that do not involve, right, threatening, firing the faculty members or merely just impugning on their rights to free speech and open inquiry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I think a valuable lesson for everyone is don't get into Twitter battles, because there's never been a Twitter battle where at the end you're like, I feel like a better person now.
Yes. Yes. I mean, you've heard the old was not a parable, this trope that don't get into don't never wrestle with a pig. You get muddy and the pig likes it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I post like links to shows and things on Twitter, and whoever responds in whatever way is lost to the internet because I don't look.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You just can't win a Twitter or a Blue Sky, for that matter, battle.
Whatever. Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that that's also the cloak and dagger aspect. It's like we can't, if the goal here is, let's just take that example. If the goal here is to show that, to convince this person that the way that they view things is warped because they're a, white male academic, it's like, okay, well then like sit down and let's try to have this conversation, but telling their academic institution to go after them is not going to change anybody's mind. It's like I oftentimes say with U.S. foreign policy, it's like nothing's going to make the Iranians love their country more than you trying to attack it all the time. Like,
Yes.
we're not going to win with this kind of idea. And even if it's not your goal to win, if your goal is to try to make a point, who are you making that point to, and what are you
Yes.
hoping is the
Yes.
outcome?
Yes. Yeah. We don't, as a social scientist, I want to do research and I want to, promulgate the research. And, if I sit and argue, with randos on Twitter, it's not really advancing those professional goals.
No, indeed.
Yeah.
And so wrapping up here, I am curious because there was another kind of overarching question when I was reading the book, which was in the morass of like students and faculty and admin and deans and all of this, the question kept coming up is, okay, so these academics I think we're all agreeing that they should be held accountable in certain ways and at certain times. But who actually are they accountable to, and who should they be accountable to?
So there are a couple of questions. No one, I have no authors that, to the best of my knowledge, are guilty of crimes. But sometimes universities are taken upon themselves to investigate actual felony sexual assault cases, right? And what was the asshole at Michigan State, the doctor who's now in jail for the rest of his life?
Yeah, I can't remember the name.
Yeah,
I'm terrible.
yeah,
with names,
Larry
but yeah.
Nassar. Larry Nassar, right? And so Larry Nassar had been investigated and exonerated by his university. And after that, the sexual assault continued, right? So certainly universities should not be in the business of investigating felonies. Full stop, right? So in that case, yeah. So in the case of felonies, let the police investigate felonies. Don't pretend to be cops. Otherwise, my understanding is twofold. They are accountable to their employers as to whether they're they're doing their jobs. And they also are accountable in the case of faculty who teach at public schools. They're accountable to the first tradition, right? So they are not allowed to be, for example, partisan political actors. And so certainly all institutions will have to have ways, of policing their employees who misbehave. But the contention of the book is this has become a star chamber. And it's because it's become a star chamber because of many, many different forces, because of a change in the funding model, which made universities ever more reliant on tuition, because of federal guidance, because of social media, because of there are several conservative lists of faculty radicals that are used as hit lists. There's no progressive, right? So watch lists of, Turning Point maintains one. The Canary Mission maintains one. There are a lot of other of these lists. I looked to see if there was a progressive counterpart of fascist professors. There is not. But so those are used to attack students. And finally, there is now an entrenched bureaucracy And if there is a large enough bureaucracy to investigate faculty members will be investigated. So I think the solution is not easy, but will, involves both different guidance from the Department of Education. Well, as long as we have one. And it'll take a lot of lawsuits.
Mm,
A lot of lawsuits.
as if we weren't litigious enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point about like they're accountable to the employers.
Yeah.
Well, that gets really sticky, like in the
Right.
essay about the fracking, where it was clear that like private interests wanted to
Yes.
make sure that these panels where people were just sharing lived experiences and sharing
Yes.
research about fracking couldn't happen. And it's like, well, technically, then the employers are feeling the pressure by the powers that be. And so they're pushing down on you, and you're technically accountable to them, but they're full of it because you should be allowed to have these panels that talk
Yes.
about fracking. So it's like, it gets really sticky there too.
So I wouldn't say that's sticky at all, because once the university has made the commitment of tenure, it needs to, live with its decision, right? Even in this case, where the university wanted to serve the state of Texas, the interests of the state of Texas and the fracking industry, they made their decision and they chose this faculty member, and so that they should live with their decision.
Yeah, I mean, but that also speaks ill for anybody who doesn't make tenure, which is, there's a precious few of those tracks.
Yes. And this is an important question and a different question, right? In a 2013 book, I looked at gender equity in higher education, why it is that women get well over half the PhDs in America, but hold only a third of the tenure stream professorships, and try to explain why that is and what we could do to fix it. And so one of the things we note is that there's an ever-growing sector of non-tenure track faculty members, which serves the university's interest, and they're cheap and fungible and fireable, but no one else's interests are served by that, right? So that's a deeper structural reform.
Yeah, I mean, again, Nick, there's like so many threads to pull on here and so much to talk about, but like, time's a ticking and I'm sure you have things to do. But I recommend that people check this out because again, I think it's one of those books that that pushes us to question what we think and what we feel, regardless of whether you have a direct connection to higher learning, but particularly with everything that's going on right now in places of higher education, if we truly believe in academic freedom and the ability for people to say things and ask questions that make people feel uncomfortable, then I think we really need to wrestle with this in a really intense way that will make hopefully everyone uncomfortable and thereby get us somewhere. So, Nick, thanks again. The book is Professors Speak Out: The Truth About Campus Investigations. I recommend that everyone check it out. Nick, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for taking so much time. I talk about the book. I very much appreciate it.